Good morning, everyone. Did you all see the super moon? The moon is bigger, or it appears bigger. Actually, the moon is the same size. I hope it's the same size. It just appears bigger. This month, when we hit the full moon in the next few months, I think, a couple more months. Talk about the moon for a moment because I'm going to be talking about consciousness today. And I give a lot of talks. I'm used to giving talks. I taught at the university for 17 years, a couple of times a week. And I travel around the country giving talks to psychotherapists. And I give talks here from time to time. And for me, giving a talk is usually pretty comfortable. Last night, I woke up at 1 o'clock in the morning and I realized that I couldn't explain today's talk. So I went out and I looked at the moon and I said, what am I going to do? And the moon said, go back to sleep. Can't help you. So we're going to talk about consciousness. So this is part one of 2 talks on consciousness. So the fact that I can't explain consciousness today is good because I'll have another chance in a few weeks. I hope the moon will be able to help me. So the overall topic is self-dedication to Dharma, practice, and service. And my practice currently is to try to understand a particular discourse of the Buddha called the Maha-Nidana Sutta. This is, Nidana means link, or links, and Maha means great. So this sutta is an explanation of the 12 links of dependent origination. So it is said that when a person is attempting to improve themselves, to be able to decrease their attachment and clinging and greediness, that their practice antidote to that is to practice generosity. And when a person is trying to improve, to decrease their aversion and anger and hatred, negativity, resentment towards others or even towards themselves, that the appropriate practice is loving kindness, compassion, patience. And when a person is trying to dispel ignorance, incorrect views, attachment to ego, misunderstanding of the self, one practices meditations on causation, causality, the Maha-Nidana Sutta, the 12 links. So the 12 links are explained in a number of different discourses, right view discourse, and some of the connected discourses go into an explanation. And these explanations are generally pretty straightforward and discuss the links of how it is either from the forward or from the reverse. How, in the reverse order, what is the cause of old age and death? Well, birth is the cause of that, and what is the cause of birth? Existence is the cause of that, and what's the cause of existence is clinging. And what's the cause of clinging? Craving. What's the cause of craving? Feeling. What's the cause of feeling? contact? What's the cause of contact? The six sense bases. What's the cause of the six sense bases? Now we start going a little bit even deeper. Eventually we go and we see that we have this connection of three complements of name and form, consciousness, and volition or mental formations that cause all of these other things. And these three together are caused by ignorance, avidya in the ancient language of Pali, Sanskrit. In Chinese, the word for ignorance is wu ming. Ming is bright. It's the sun next to the moon. My friend the moon. That's why I was hoping the supermoon would help me. Give me some brightness. If we have a flashlight, we say, oh, I'm in the dark, I can flash the light, I can see things. If I can turn on the lights in the room, I have a lot of brightness. If I could only turn on the light in my consciousness, then my consciousness will be full of light. I could be enlightened. This is the third noble truth. It's possible to turn on the light in consciousness, to be able to dispel the darkness, the ignorance. How we do this is through the Eightfold Path. So in the Chinese, we're here at a Chinese-based teachings of Chan Buddhism, later in Japan known as Zen. So in Chinese, Yi Che Yi Xin Si, all things are nothing but consciousness. Yi Che Wei Xue, everything is nothing but consciousness. Everything is representation only. This is the basis of Mahayana Yogacara Buddhism. This is a little bit deep. You can see why I woke up at 1 in the morning. There's an interview that was done in Australia of a very popular teacher who, I'm not sure specifically that he's Buddhist, although he's interested in Buddhism considerably. He's written some books and he's been involved in even some movies that have been released about the Buddha, and named Deepak Chopra. You may have heard of him. And he was asked by a reporter just recently, this year, what is the message that you are most passionate about communicating these days? That was the question. And Deepak Chopra said, I'm most passionate about many things. At the moment, my focus is on the science of consciousness. Science at the moment is at a crossroads. Science is based on empirical evidence. Science, however, maintains that the universe is mind-independent, and yet insists on empirical evidence, which is mind-dependent. So those scientists who say that the universe is independent of the mind, well, those people are using the mind to say that. So in Western psychology, consciousness is the quality or state of awareness. Being aware of an external object or an internal awareness, something within. Sometimes it's defined as sentient or awareness. The ability to experience or feel, to be awake. have a sense of self. So many of these words are used in Buddhism, particularly the words of sentience, wakefulness, being aware. The origin of the modern concept of consciousness is attributed to John Locke. In his essay at the very end of the 18th century, 1690, when he talks about consciousness as the perception of what passes in a man's own mind. William James, one of the great psychologists, who in fact himself was very much against anything except what was empirical at the beginning of his career. William James actually succumbed to a very deep depression. He married a wonderful woman who was a nurse who was interested in teaching him how to not be so depressed. And she taught him meditation techniques. And lo and behold, his depression lifted. So William James became very interested in his own, what he called, stream of thought. This is the first utilization of this terminology in 1890, 200 years after John Locke. About the stream of consciousness, or stream of thought. And every thought tends to be part of a personal consciousness, he said. And within each personal conscious thought, these things are always changing, they're impermanent. And within each person's consciousness, thought is something that's continuous. And it appears to deal with objects independent of itself, but that those objects independent of itself are actually connected. So this term, mind stream or stream of consciousness, also used in Buddhism. The Sanskrit term is chitta santana. Chitta meaning mind, santana meaning stream. And so in the Buddhist view, the mind stream is viewed primarily as this chatter that's going on. It distracts our attention from being able to contact our true, pure awareness, or the pure mind. It's underneath all of this chattering. So to be able to understand consciousness, we need to see that it arises in many places in the Buddhist teachings. It's the third link, nidana, in the 12 links of dependent origination. First, ignorance in the forward order, ignorance, mental formations, consciousness, name and form. These are the first four. It's the fifth of the 5 aggregates of the skandhas. Form, feeling, perception, conception, mental formations, and consciousness. So consciousness is distinctly different on that level from even our perception and cognition and our mental formations, but they're intertwined, interconnected. It's part of the 6 consciousnesses of the eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body, and mind, which then form the basis for what's called the 18 constituents, where the Buddha understood that if you take an object, the object itself does not mean that you have consciousness. You have an organ, the eyeball, that sees the object, but even that is not sufficient to create consciousness. So you need the object, you need the sense organ, and then what he called the realm of eye consciousness. So back in the day of the Buddha, they didn't have the exact understanding of how the information goes into the eye and is communicated in the occipital lobe, but even that in and of itself is just mechanistic. It doesn't really, because you can't just take out the eye and the brain, or the occipital lobe or whatever, and put it somewhere, and then say, look at the flowers, it's not going to see anything. It's all interconnected. It's interlinked. A great linkage. Maha and Nidana. And so on, consciousness shows up in many different places. Now today we're doing chanting from the Blue Book. And this book we alternate every other month. We are going to be reading the Heart of Prajnaparamita Sutra, the Heart Sutra. And in the Heart Sutra, you will come to read that therefore in emptiness there is no form. Remember, form is one of the 5 aggregates. Form, feeling, conception, mental formations, and consciousness. So here it says, in emptiness there is no form, there is no feeling, conception, volition, and consciousness. Here are the 5 aggregates, all in a row. And then it says, no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, no form, no object, sound, smell, taste, touch, and dharmas, no realm of vision. That's the entire process that brings vision into place. All the way up to no realm of mind consciousness. And no ignorance and no ending of ignorance and so forth. Up to, so here he's talking about the 18 constituents. It's based on the 6 senses, and then he goes in here, and speaking of no ignorance, all the way up to no aging and death, so that this is the 12 links. So all of this are the teachings that where consciousness shows up. So Mahanidana, I'm going to explain here, is a very important sutta because it expands on 2 areas of dependent origination. 2 of the links are expanded. Usually when we see the explanation of the Nidana, the links, it's very short. There's a short paragraph. So it says, this depends on this and this depends on that. Sometimes it goes into more detail in the sutta and says, you know, what is birth and death? What is, so when I talk about birth, they talks about the different ways that beings are born. What kind of existence is there? They talk about the different realms of existence. When they talk about clinging, they talk about the different types of clinging and so forth. So they go into a little bit more detail. But in the Mahanidana Sutta, they don't just go into that level of detail, but in 2 areas they go into a deeper explanation. And last time I gave a talk, I talked about the section on craving, on the 10 different stages of craving. So there are 2 more paragraphs. We don't find in any of the other suttas, just like that. And then he continues on in the simplified version until he gets to consciousness. When the Buddha gets to consciousness, he gives several pages of explanation. In the English, it's probably 4 pages or so, explanation on consciousness, divided into different sections. So, Thanissaro Bhikkhu, one of the great translators, along with Bhikkhu Bodhi, Thanissaro Bhikkhu lives in Southern California, outside of San Diego, in a place called Metta Forest Monastery, Metta, loving kindness. And when you drive up to the monastery, on either side of the road, there are hundreds of avocado trees and signs that say, have loving kindness. So that by the time you get there, you have a lot of loving kindness and an urge for avocados. So he says, the second part of the Maha discourse, he's talking about the second part that's expanded, takes up the teachings of no self, shows how dependent co-arising gives focus to this teaching and practice. It begins with a section on delineations of self, classifying the various ways in which a sense of self might be defined in terms of form. Formlessness, finite, and not finite, infinite. The scheme of analysis introduced in this section, classifying views of the self according to the variables of form and formlessness, finite and infinite, already existing, naturally developing in the future, and alterable through human effort, covers all the theories of the self proposed in the classical Upanishads, as well as all the theories of self or soul proposed in more recent times. So the inclusion of an infinite self in this list gives a little bit of an initial misunderstanding of the belief that the Buddhist teachings on not self are denying nothing more than a sense of a separate or limited self. But in fact, this discourse points out that even a limitless, infinite, all-embracing sense of self is based on an obsession in the mind that has to be abandoned. So the Buddha, in all of his teachings, says we need to avoid the extremes. One extreme is eternalism, and the other extreme is nihilism. He says that Buddhism is a middle way between the two. So here again, he's saying that there's a middle way between seeing consciousness as form based on a physical body, or independent of form, not based on a physical body. There's something in between. And that there's something in between it being limited to this lifespan and unlimited from one life to the next. There's something in between. This is why I got up at 1 o'clock in the morning. So in the following section, Thanissaro Bhikkhu continues, a non-delineation of self shows that it is possible for the mind to function without reading of the self into any experience. The remaining sections focus on a way in which this can be done by treating the sense of self as it relates to different aspects of name and form. This is where things are very, very helpful to know what is meant by name and form. Nama Rupa, which is name and form. So what is Nama Rupa? Nama Rupa really is the 5 aggregates. Again, form, feeling, conception, mental formation, consciousness. I say the word conception, perception, conception, because it has to do with the 6 senses. So here we have an understanding that rupa, as form, is also made up of what's called at that time the 4 elements. Because at that time they didn't have an understanding of what was inside of objects. The Buddha always said, okay, inside this object, something smaller, something smaller, something smaller, until you get to something jumping in and out of existence. So he got the pieces of the puzzle together, but they didn't have names at that time for molecules and atoms and quarks and leptons and things like that. They didn't have those names. That required instrumentation. It was unavailable. But the mind insight saw that there were these different levels. This is remarkable that someone so long ago, 2,500 years ago, had that awareness just by observing the mind. So nama rupa we say that so Kanasara Bhikkhu says that between ignorance and the six senses, there are these three components of mental formations, consciousness, and name and form, and he calls this the hidden vortex. Vortex is kind of like a circle that's going around and around a certain point, trying to escape from the vortex. So this difficult to separate these elements because they're so closely connected. So consciousness is part of the five aggregates. So on one hand, the consciousness is its own element within the 12 links, but on the other hand, it's directly connected to name and form, as is mental formations. They have their separateness and they're also connected at the same time. So this consciousness, vijnana in Pali, V-I, and then N-N with the little squiggles on top of it, so that's Vin, and with a Y, Yana. So in Sanskrit, it's easier to pronounce, I think, Vijnana, V-I-J. And so this means how our awareness comes to know something. In Greek, we have a word similar to this. We have Gnostic, which is G-N-O. So the G-N-O in the Greek is very similar to the J-N-A, Ja, which means to know in Sanskrit. So the languages are interconnected. We have the knower, the Gnostic. The person who says, I don't know, the agnostic, which has come to, again, then become more nihilistic. But the original word means not knowing. So there are two types of this vijnana. Actually, three parts, if you really want to get very clear about it. One has to do with what's called kaya, or the body, and the other is called vachi, which means the voice, or speech. And in the Chinese, the word shi would mean, it has the character for speech in it. So kaya is one of the three channels by which a man's personality is connected with his environment. His bodily actions. And then vachi, V-A-C-I, the C-H sound, this is the action of speech. And then the third area is the manas, or the action of the mind. So this mana, eventually in Mahayana Buddhism, takes on its own meaning as its own kind of consciousness. The kind of consciousness with the actions of the mind that are, in a sense, linked to our ego, that have to be purified. And these three parts are intricately connected to our karma. In the Pali, the word kama, so that here these three are called kamantas. The three activities or agents that that are part of our conduct that lead to cause and effect. When you do something, then there's an effect. And again, these also form the three volitional formations. The formation of the mind, the mental formations, the speech formations, and the bodily formations. So what are these three? Because the habit energy or the formations are linked to consciousness that are linked to name and form, the aggregates. So how do we understand what these three types of formations are? What are they? So fortunately, there's some very good teachings on this. One of the best teachings was given by one of the female monastics at the time of the Buddha. Her name was Dharma. She was one of the great teachers at the time of the Buddha. And the Buddha praised her for how clear her teachings were. That when she had left to go into the monastic life, she had a husband who gave her permission, Visakha, who was a wealthy merchant. And when he was trying to understand the teachings of the Buddha, he would go to Dhammadina and ask her for clarification on these points. So at one time, Visakha goes to Dhammadina and he says, "Now, lady, what are the fabrications, in this case, the formations?" Fabrications are the word that is used by Hanasaro Bhikkhu. Same Sankara, the same term. These three fabrications, friend, Visakha, bodily fabrications, verbal fabrications, and mental fabrications or formations. It says, but what are the bodily fabrications? What are the verbal fabrications? What are the mental fabrications? So this is the habit energy that for example, the body does over and over and over again, that is almost under our control, but not really. The verbal, our speech, what is under our control, but maybe not really. And the mind, habit energy, what we think about, which might be under our control, but not really, depending on our practice. So when we talk about sentient beings, consciousness, we talk about the ability to be able to know, to be able to put our mind onto something, keep it there. We might see what mental fabrications come up that distract us, that keep us from having a clear understanding of not only the object, but also the awareness of the object. What is the light that we are casting from our own mind onto the object? So the three parts. What is the habit energy of the body? Breath. Breathing. Now we begin to understand that when we're practicing and we're trying to understand our consciousness, our own pure awareness, where do we put the mind when we first start to do meditation? We put it on the breath. here we are, we're breathing, breathing. The mind, we want to know the breathing, we want to know the body as body. You put the mind there, suddenly the mind is somewhere else. Gently bring it back. It's there for a little bit, and it wanders away again. You gently bring it back. You continue to gently bring it back until the mind is able to stay on the object, but not just on the object. We can have an awareness of our awareness. It's not the form that's so important, it's the awareness itself. This is our consciousness. And eventually, we have to penetrate through the form and the feelings, our perceptions, not to attach, to overcome, as Master talked about in his last talk last week, overcoming our attachment to the external objects, including cell phones. Not easy. So our mind jumps to these things, and then we gently bring it back without judgment. Because whenever we get judgment involved, judging ourselves, judging others, then that blocks our awareness of the process of awareness itself. So we can't penetrate any more deeply. We can't really see our feelings. We really can't see our perceptions, our conceptions, our mental formations, or our consciousness, because it's all blocked. We get stuck in the form. I'm extremely grateful for the fact that my time has run out. Because this is as far as my awareness has gone so far. I received a file in Google Files from Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, which I think is related to this topic that he was sending me, but when I went into the Google Files to get it, there was nothing there. So either he was teaching me about emptiness, or there was something technologically that didn't work, or something in between. So I thank you very much for your kind attention today. Thanks to the super moon. And all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. And all beings never be separated from the sacred joy which is free from suffering. And may all beings dwell in the great equanimity which is free from attachment, aversion,